a nivel económico. Ya en 1860, de nuevo, igual que estaba pasando en la época colonial, si tú perteneces a todos estos grupos sociales, no tienes nada que hacer en la política, no tienes nada que hacer en la economía, ¿verdad? Entonces, la lucha está entre los grupos de poder de la oligarquía, que son los productores de bienes de exportación. Y ahora, la burguesía, que son los administradores. Estos dos grupos son los que buscan, o los que luchan, ¿verdad?, por el poder político. Y la burguesía, por su parte, va accediendo a ese poder político de la misma manera que los criollos lo habían hecho en la época colonial, a través de su poder económico. Entonces, el burgués va ganando dinero, digámoslo así, y a través de su capacidad de ganar dinero, trata de hacerse caber dentro del modelo capitalista burgués, que es el modelo económico. So the idea is the following, in English, so that it's clear, because it's very important. You come from sort of this sector, right? In 1815, your family opened a store in Guatemala City. Okay? I was giving you the example of Miguel Ángel Asturias, right? So there you go. So that's one example right there. There's in the countryside, basically a feudal mode of production. People own large coffee plantations or large sugar plantations in Guatemala, right? And they employ, pretty much as they had in colonial times, the indigenous population to produce coffee and sugar and bananas. But let's just do two, and it's more than that, but this is for an example only. The people who produce the coffee and the sugar need to export it somewhere internationally, whether through the ports in the Pacific or in the Atlantic coast. In order to be able to do that, someone needs to count the amount of sugar that you're producing, develop the industrial techniques necessary for your production to pay off, right? To be rentable, to be, ¿cómo se rentable? What's the word in Spanish? You produce a commodity and then you give you benefits. And you need basically an urban infrastructure. That urban infrastructure becomes the bourgeoisie. That bourgeoisie establishes itself following this model. I just moved in from the countryside, right? I just came in from whatever, Padonk, Guatemala, and I say, how do I make myself into someone who doesn't just come in from the countryside? How I avoid being seen as a redneck? Well,
education first.
Not necessarily. Have you watched Cribs on MTV? Yeah, no, exacto. But that's the idea, is that the first thing that people want to is fit this model following the easiest parts possible, right? So you're not thinking about reason and education yet. You say, okay, well, I'm going to dress like the people in the city for one thing, right? I'm going to eliminate from my person everything that seems to identify me with this group here. So if you come from the countryside and you're Indian, you're going to buy your, throw away your indigenous clothes and dress like a bourgeois. You're going to buy a house in the right part of town. You're going to buy a flashy carriage with nice horses. The first elements are, well, I'm sorry, but that's what people do. That's why the modernistas come out of that, though. It's very interesting. And so the consumer society is what emerges at this time, not just in Latin America. This is worldwide, right? And the second generation, Paola, then for the second generation, you start thinking about making them fit all the other roles within this bourgeois society. So I came here, I worked hard, I bought a nice house, and now my kid is going to go to a good school where he's going to learn, he's going to be educated in the models of the state, and it's going to learn the reasoning processes that are prevalent in the city. So you send your kids to private school, and here's your next generation of the bourgeois, who then have a much more solid base on this space. Because, porque, como decíamos antes, what you're doing is you're learning the codes of behavior, of socially acceptable belonging to the club of the urban class, which is also the economic class, and eventually also the political class. Okay, so you're learning these processes, and really what realismo and naturalismo are doing is the same thing that was happening with the critiques that were emerging from the criollos towards the colonial powers in the colonial period. Lo que termina sucediendo es que esta burguesía, this bourgeoisie here, who has roots in the lower classes, begins to look at these processes and say, well, maybe we're not doing things right. Because even though we have managed to achieve a position up here, right, our cousins still live down in the countryside, still are poor. Children in my little hometown are still going hungry and starving, and so on. And that's a little bit what naturalism brings out. Part of naturalism brings out breeds a social critique that pinpoints or that points out the shortcomings of this capitalist process in the urban centers. In a way, well, if you live in the city and you never go to the countryside, you don't see it. But since you are a good bourgeois and you are reading a lot, because that's what they tell you in school you have to do, someone writes a novel about the kids who starve to death in the countryside, and you